CBS News, moving on, has learned more details about a target letter sent to Donald Trump informing him he's the subject of a Justice Department investigation into efforts to overturn the 2020 election. A senior Trump source confirmed the letter highlights 3 federal statutes, including potential charges of conspiracy to commit an offense or to defraud the United States. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane has more.
We have prosecutors that are evil people. These are evil people.
Former President Trump lashed out at special counsel Jack Smith and posted a video rallying supporters to join him.
We will throw off the sick political class that hates our country.
With a potential criminal indictment looming, CBS News has learned the target letter Smith sent to Trump cites several possible charges, including conspiracy to defraud the U.S., deprivation of rights under color of law, which applies when someone uses power to deny constitutional rights, and witness tampering and obstruction of an official proceeding, the January 6th electoral count certification.
This goes to the top of the most serious charges that the former president will face. This is of a constitutional dimension. We've never seen anything like this in the history of our country.
The obstruction count was used against more than 300 defendants in the Capitol riot. The D.C. grand jury probing Trump's actions is still at work, and the special counsel recently contacted Arizona's former governor, Doug Ducey, who Trump allegedly called in the aftermath of the election to pressure him to overturn the results. The former president's allies said he faces an uphill climb if charged in Washington.
Do you think Donald Trump can't get a fair trial in the District of Columbia? Why is that?
Well, he got 5% of the vote. You can indict a Republican for almost anything and get convicted in this city.
You don't think a jury can put the politics aside and say, here are the facts?
No.
Scott MacFarlane joins me now. We'll get to those comments in a second, Scott. But part of the target letter highlights the possibility of charges of obstruction of proceedings, a charge many of the January 6 rioters have faced, and you've covered so many of those trials. What are those cases that contain that charge? How do those go? And have you seen any connection in those cases with former President Trump?
Those cases have been consistent, John. As you mentioned, more than 300 January 6 riot defendants have been charged with that very obscure federal crime, obstruction of an official proceeding, the January 6th electoral certification count. They've all gone through federal judges and through courtrooms with these cases, and not one judge has stopped or said there's just not enough evidence that this person was part of something that obstructed an official proceeding. Not in a way that ruled the day or that could give a future defendant on those charges something to grasp onto and say, look, there's precedent that this charge doesn't stick, that this case doesn't hold. So that's a warning, a red flag for the former president if that's a charge he faces. There's so much muscle memory in this courthouse for that obscure U.S. code violation, the obstruction of an official proceeding.
Going back to what Senator Lindsey Graham said, he in his remarks to you suggested that this was some frivolous charge with no merit to it. But of course, Senator Graham was among the many members of Congress who were quite shaken and, in fact, tied the events on January 6th to the former president. Does the fact that many of them were there on January 6th change their defense of the former president? They've defended him on many of these other charges, but this one would seem to be different. Is it?
Few things are more consistent in life, John, than Republican reaction on Capitol Hill to a Trump criminal problem. It has been impermeable. The support Republicans have shown Donald Trump, the consistency with which they call any prosecution or investigation a weaponization of the Department of Justice or the tools of the federal government to take out Trump politically ahead of the 2024 election. That hasn't changed. Based on the revelations, he has a target letter now and is likely to face charges for January 6th, just like it didn't change after the charges were filed in Miami or the charges were filed in Manhattan. There's no indication politically any of that's going to change. Now, what skin in the game do members of Congress have beyond either championing or criticizing the former president? It's always possible members of Congress have something to say about a case filed on January 6th. I haven't seen one of them walk into this courthouse to testify at a January 6th defendant's case. Not one of them's come in to give a victim impact statement, even though they were all to a degree victimized, some acutely so. Maybe that changes if the defendant's Donald Trump and he's the one in the courtroom.
And then finally, I want to ask you, the special counsel's target letter says that former President Trump is being investigated for deprivation of rights under color of law, which is a term of art that's interesting. Why is that different than the potential charge of conspiracy or obstruction, that color of law language?
That's a Justice Department phrase. It's actually obviously U.S. code and a violation to violate that code. But it really relates to officials. Think police officers, sheriff's deputies, local, state, and federal government officials, depriving somebody over whom you have authority of their rights. There's any number of directions Jack Smith could go with that, and it's dangerous to speculate to a degree. But we know it speaks to officials, and if nothing else, John, it underscores a significant point here. This is a former president poised to be charged by the federal government for deprivation of rights. It's been historic from the start, but this really underscores the magnitude of the history that's about to be made, if not imminently, at the federal courthouse here in Washington.
A former president asking to have those powers again if he's reelected. Scott MacFarlane in Washington. Thank you, Scott.